Medical examiners called it blunt force trauma consistent with a hydraulic press. The tabloids called it the Volkov curse. For 3 years, the alpha king of the Silver Pine Territory, Garrick Volkov, lived in isolation, standing 72 and weighing over 300 lb of pure muscle. He was a biological anomaly, a weapon of war that could not be switched off. 3 women had tried to claim the title of queen. 3 women left the estate in body bags. The world agreed. To mate with Garrick was a death sentence. But on November 14, 2023, a terrified Omega named Talia O'Malley walked into the lion's den. Not because she wanted power, but because she had no choice. This is the true story of the monster who didn't want to be saved and the girl who survived the night. Rain hammered against the slate roof of the Assembly Hall in Forks, Washington. It was a miserable night for a mating ceremony. Yet, the parking lot was full of black SUVs. The atmosphere inside wasn't festive, it was funereal. The annual gathering of the North American PAX was usually a time for alliances and drinking. But this year, the air tasted like ozone and fear. Garrick Volkov sat on the mahogany dais, a solitary figure that seemed to absorb the light around him. Even seated, the man was terrifying. His shoulders spanned nearly twice the width of the beta standing beside him. The fabric of his custom-tailored suit strained against biceps that were thicker than most men's thighs. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a loaded cannon waiting for a spark. He stared at the floor. His jaw set so hard a muscle twitched visibly beneath his scarred cheek. He didn't want to be there. The council demands a mate. Alpha, his advisor, a graying wolf named Benedict, whispered. The treaty with the Southern Pax depends on it. You need an heir. Garrick didn't answer. He just looked at his hands that were rumored to have crushed a grizzly bear's skull in 2019 during a border dispute. He hated them. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as the eligible females were paraded forward. It was barbaric, archaic, and necessary. But unlike previous years, no one was stepping forward to volunteer. The daughters of the high-ranking Halfas, women who usually fought for the crown, were cowering behind their fathers. They had heard the stories. They knew about Cynthia, the first wife, found broken at the bottom of the stairs. Knew about Alina, whose heart simply stopped on her wedding night. Next, the master of ceremonies barked. A frail girl was shoved forward. She couldn't have been more than 19. She was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. This was Lucio Ali. She was an unranked wolf, a nobody from a defunct pack in Idaho. Her father, a gambler with debts to the wrong people, had put her name in the lottery in exchange for a cleared ledger. Garrick looked up. His eyes were the color of frozen moss. He saw the terror in Lucy's face. He let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated in the chests of everyone in the front row. It wasn't aggression, it was a warning. Run, his eyes seemed to say. Get away from me. Lucy sobbed. Please, she whimpered. Please don't make me. The crowd went silent. To reject an alpha king was treason. To reject Garrick Volkov was usually suicide. She is the chosen tribute. The master of ceremonies announced coldly. The debt must be paid. Garrick stood up. The sound of his chair scraping back was like a gunshot. He towered over the room, casting a long shadow over the weeping girl. He took a step down from the dais. The floorboards creaked under his immense weight. I will not take a mate who smells of fear. Garrick's voice was deep, growly, like stones grinding together. Take her away. The debt remains, Garrick, a voice shouted from the back. It was Lucy's father. Someone has to pay. Garrick snarled, his control slipping, the beast inside him. The mega-alpha gene that made him a freak of nature was clawing at the surface. He needed to leave before he hurt someone. Again, I will take her place. The voice was soft, barely audible over the rain, but it cut through the tension like a razor. Heads turned from the shadows of the exit doors. A figure stepped forward. She was small, painfully small. She wore a faded waitress uniform and a soaking wet raincoat. She pulled back her hood, revealing messy auburn hair and eyes that burned with a strange, desperate resolve. It was Talia Ali, Lucy's older sister. Talia was an Omega. In the hierarchy of wolves, she was at the bottom, physically weaker, submissive by nature, usually relegated to domestic duties. Standing 53, she looked like a child compared to the titan on the stage. Talia, no, Lucy screamed. Talia ignored her sister. She walked down the center aisle, her wet sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She didn't look at the crowd. She kept her eyes locked on Garrick. Garrick froze. He had faced armies, rogue packs, and federal investigations. He had never seen anything as confusing as this tiny woman walking toward her death. You are an Omega, Benedict scoffed. You cannot handle the Alpha's energy. You would burn out in a week. The law states a volunteer supersedes a lottery pick, Talia said, her voice shaking but her chin high. She stopped at the foot of the dais. She had to crane her neck back just to look Garrick in the eye. I volunteer. I take the debt. I take the bond. Garrick looked down at her. He could snap her neck with 2 fingers. He could crush her just by rolling over in his sleep. She was fragile, breakable. Do you have a death wish, girl? Garrick asked quietly. I have a sister, Talia replied. And I won't let you kill her, Garrick flinched. The accusation hit its mark. Kill her, that's what everyone thought, that he was a murderer. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. He smelled like pine rain and raw, overwhelming power. The sheer pressure of his aura usually made Omega's faint. Talia's knees buckled, but she grabbed the edge of the dais to stay upright. She didn't look away. I am not a prize, Garrick whispered. For her ears only. I am a graveyard. Then bury me, Talia whispered back, but let her go. Garrick stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the terror in her pulse, the way her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But he also saw fire that he hadn't seen in the eyes of the warriors or the highborn ladies. He straightened up, his face becoming a mask of stone. Done, Garrick boomed, his voice echoing off the rafters. The Omega is mine. The ceremony is tonight. He turned and stormed off the stage without looking back, leaving Talia standing alone in the center of the room, shivering as the realization of what she had just done crashed down on her. The drive to the Vilova estate took 2 hours. Talia sat in the back of the armored Cadillac Escalade. The leather seats were cold. Next to her, Garrick took up 2/3 of the bench. He hadn't said a word since they left the hall. He stared out the tinted window, watching the pine trees blur into a wall of black. Talia tried to control her breathing. She knew the statistics. She had read the blog posts on the Wolf Watch forums. Garrick Vilov's curse. They said his wolf was too big for his human body, that the internal conflict made him violent and unpredictable during the mating cycle. They said he lost control and tore his mates apart. She looked at his hand resting on his knee. It was the size of a catcher's mitt. The knuckles were white. He wasn't relaxed. He was tense, rigid as a board. Stop shaking, Garrick said. He didn't turn his head. I can't, Talia admitted. I'm not going to eat you in the car, he grunted. That's comforting. Garrick turned slowly. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Most people didn't use sarcasm with him. They begged or they flattered. You have a mouth on you, Omega. I have a name. It's Talia. Talia. He tested the word. It sounded foreign on his tongue. Why did you really do it? Your father's debt could have been paid another way. I would have written a check. Talia blinked. They said you demanded a mate, that you wouldn't accept money. Garrick's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? The master of ceremonies. And your beta, Benedict. Garrick looked forward again, a dark scowl forming. Benedict talks too much. The car slowed as they approached the gates of the Volkov estate. It was a fortress. 12T stone walls topped with razor wire. Security cameras buzzed and pivoted as the vehicle passed. The mansion itself was a sprawling Gothic revival structure made of dark stone, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was beautiful, but it looked lonely. The car stopped. The driver, a silent man named Corbin, opened the door. Garrick got out first. When Talia stepped out, the wind off the ocean nearly knocked her over. Garrick's hand shot out, catching her arm to steady her. His grip was shockingly gentle, but the heat radiating from his skin burned through her coat. He let go immediately, as if he had been burned. Inside, he commanded. The foyer was cavernous. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor. The staff was lined up. Maids, cooks, groundskeepers, they kept their heads bowed. No one looked at Talia. It was as if she was already a ghost. Dinner is served in the West Wing, Alpha, Benedict said, stepping out of the shadows. He looked at Talia with a mixture of pity and disdain. Shall I prepare the bridal suite? Garrick stiffened. No, Benedict paused. Sir, put her in the blue room down the hall, but the mating rites. I said the blue room, Garrick roared. The sound was so loud a vase on a side table rattled. The staff flinched. Talia took a step back. Garrick closed his eyes, inhaling deeply through his nose, forcing the beast back down. She sleeps alone tonight. Get out of my sight. Benedict bowed low, a sly smile touching his lips that only Talia caught. As you wish. Dinner was a silent affair. Talia sat at one end of a 20-foot table, Garrick at the other. He ate quickly, efficiently tearing into a rare steak. Talia pushed peas around her plate. Eat, Garrick said. You're too thin, you'll break. Is that what happened to the others? Talia asked. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Garrick dropped his fork. The clatter echoed in the silence. He stood up and walked toward her. Talia froze, her heart hammering. He didn't stop until he was standing right behind her chair. She could feel the heat of his body. She waited for the blow. She waited for the rage. Instead, he leaned down, his voice heavy with exhaustion. They didn't break because they were thin, and Talia. They died because this house is poisoned and I was arrogant enough to think I could protect them. He walked to the door. Lock your door tonight. Do not open it for anyone, clear his throat, not even me. Where are you going? She asked. To the cellar, Garrick said, his hand on the doorknob. Where monsters belong, he slammed the door. Talia didn't sleep in the blue room. After 2 hours of lying awake, listening to the wind howl, curiosity overcame fear. She had to know. She crept out into the hallway. The house was silent. She followed the faint scent of damp earth and iron Garrick's scent. It led her down the back stairs, past the kitchen to a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. It was slightly ajar. Talia peeked inside. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a high-tech containment unit. The walls were reinforced concrete, and there, in the center of the room, was the mighty Alpha King. He wasn't sleeping on a bed of silks. He was chained. Heavy titanium cuffs bound his wrists and ankles to large steel bolts in the floor. He was stripped to the waist, sweat glistening on his massive back. He was shaking, fighting against himself, his muscles spasming as the wolf tried to force the shift. He had chained himself up to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone if he lost control in his sleep. Talia watched her hand over her mouth. He wasn't the predator the world said he was. He was the prisoner. Suddenly, Garrick's head snapped up. His eyes were glowing a feral amber. He sniffed the air. "Talia," he growled, the voice distorted and inhuman. "Run." Talia didn't run. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, to scramble up the stairs and lock herself in the blue room as ordered. The man, the creature in front of her, was a nightmare made flesh. Garrick's muscles were bunching and rolling under his skin as if something was trying to break out of him. The titanium chains groaned under the strain. His growl was low, vibrating through the concrete floor and into the soles of her sneakers. But she saw his eyes amidst the glowing amber of the wolf. There was a sliver of human panic. He wasn't trying to break free to kill her. He was trying to stay chained to save her. "Get out," Garrick roared, the words tearing from his throat. Talia took a step forward. "No," she whispered. She took another step. The air in the room was heavy, charged with static electricity. It smelled of ozone and burning wood. This was the Alpha Aura, the crushing weight that usually forced wolves to their knees. But Talia was an Omega. Her biology wasn't built to challenge an Alpha. It was built to soothe one. "You're hurting yourself," she said, her voice gaining a surprising steadiness. She could see the metal cuffs digging into his wrists, drawing blood. "I will kill you," Garrick snarled, snapping his teeth. Saliva dripped from his jaw. "I can't stop it." "You can," Talia said. She was 3 FT away now. She could feel the heat radiating off him like a furnace. "You're not a monster, Garrick. You're just in pain." She reached out of hand. Garrick flinched violently, squeezing his eyes shut. "Don't touch me. The last one who touched me during a shift ended up in the ICU." Talia didn't listen. She placed her small, trembling hand on his massive, sweating shoulder. The effect was instantaneous. A shock wave went through the room. It wasn't an explosion, but a sudden, violent silence. The moment her skin touched his, the chaotic energy swirling around Garrick seemed to ground itself. It was like a lightning rod catching a storm. Garrick gasped, his eyes flying open. The feral amber faded, replaced by his natural moss-green irises. He stared at her hand on his shoulder, then up at her face, his expression one of utter bewilderment. "How?" he rasped. The pain, it stopped. "My mother was a healer." Talia lied softly. She wasn't a healer. She was just an Omega who refused to be afraid. "She taught me that pain is just fear leaving the body." She moved her hand to his cheek. His stubble was rough against her palm. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes again, but this time in relief, not agony. The mega-alpha rage, the chemical imbalance that had plagued him for years, was quieting down. "You're so small," Garrick murmured, his voice returning to its deep human baritone. "I could crush you by accident." "Then don't," Talia said simply. "Unchain yourself, Garrick. You don't belong in a cage." Garrick looked at the cuffs. With a heavy sigh, he reached down. He didn't use a key, he simply pulled. The reinforced steel bolts sheared off the floor with a screech of tearing metal. Talia's eyes widened. The strength required to do that was incalculable. He stood up, towering over her, the broken chains dangling from his wrists. He looked at his hands, then at her. For the first time in 3 years, the fog in his mind had cleared. "You stayed," he said, as if stating a miracle. "I stayed," she confirmed. Garrick scooped her up in his arms. He didn't ask, he just lifted her as easily as if she were a doll. Talia gasped, clutching his bare shoulders. "Where are we going?" "Upstairs," Garrick said, walking toward the door. "If you are going to be my queen, you will not sleep in the guest room, and you will certainly not sleep in the basement." The next morning, sunlight streamed into the master suite. It was a room fit for a king, gold leaf trim, velvet curtains, and a bed the size of a small island. Talia woke up alone in the bed, buried under a mountain of down comforters. She sat up, checking herself. She was wearing one of Garrick's t-shirts, which hung on her like a dress. She was alive. She was unheard. The door opened. It wasn't Garrick. It was Benedict, the advisor. He froze in the doorway, a silver tray in his hands. His eyes widened when he saw Talia sitting up, yawning. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Good morning, Benedict," Talia said, stretching. "Is that coffee?" Benedict composed himself quickly, his face settling back into a mask of polite indifference. "Miss Ali, I did not expect to find you here. The Alpha usually requires solitude after a difficult night." "He slept on the couch," Talia said, pointing to the leather sofa at the far end of the room. "He snores." It was a lie. Garrick hadn't slept. He had sat in a chair by the window all night, watching her, guarding her. He had left only an hour ago to handle pack business. Benedict walked over and placed the tray on the nightstand. "Drink this. It is a tonic prepared by our pack physician, Dr. Aries. It helps with the adjustment to the Alpha's energy." The liquid in the crystal glass was a murky green. It smelled faintly of almonds. Talia reached for it, but her hand stopped. Her nose wrinkled. Omegas had a heightened sense of smell for things that were off-spoiled meat. Sickness, danger. It was an evolutionary trait to protect the pups. The drink didn't smell like medicine. It smelled like foxglove and wolves' bane. I'm not thirsty, Talia said, pulling her hand back. I insist, Benedict said, his voice dropping an octave. The alpha commands it. Does he? The voice came from the doorway. Garrick stood there, dressed in a fresh charcoal suit. He looked imposing, healthy, and most importantly, angry. Benedict spun around. Alpha, I was just attending to your mate. Garrick walked into the room. He didn't look at Benedict. He looked at the glass. He picked it up. Dr. Aries prescribed this? Garrick asked. Yes, sir, for her nerves. Garrick brought the glass to his lips. No, Talia shouted, scrambling out of bed. Garrick paused. He looked at Talia, then back at Benedict. Benedict was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down the older wolf's temple. Why did she yell, Benedict? Garrick asked softly. Is there something wrong with the tonic? She is hysterical, Alpha, the bonding process. Garrick smashed the glass against the wall. The green liquid hissed as it hit the paint, bubbling slightly. Get out, Garrick said. The command was absolute. Benedict bowed stiffly and hurried out of the room. Garrick turned to Talia. His face was pale. You knew, he said. How did you know? It smelled wrong. Talia whispered. Garrick, that wasn't medicine. Garrick walked to the window, staring out at the gray ocean. For 3 years I have been losing my mind, losing control. My strength has been growing, but my sanity has been slipping. Dr. Aris has been treating me for hyperalpha aggression syndrome. He turned back to her, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying realization. They haven't been treating me, Talia. They've been poisoning me. They wanted me to go mad. They wanted me to kill my mate so the council would deem me unfit to rule. Who? Talia asked. Benedict, Garrick said. And whoever is pulling his strings, they want the throne. And they realized they couldn't kill me in a fight, so they tried to make me kill myself. He walked over to her and took her hands. His grip was firm. You are in danger here. Every second you stay, you are a target. I'm not leaving, Talia said stubbornly. Talia, no, she cut him off. They think you're a monster. They think I'm a victim. Let's use that. Tonight is the winter solstice gala. All the pack alphas will be there. Benedict expects you to be drugged and unstable. He expects me to be terrified. She looked up at him, her brown eyes fierce. Let's show them the king is back. The grand ballroom of the Volkov estate hadn't been used in 5 years. Dust covers had been pulled off the chandeliers, and the floor had been polished until it looked like black ice. At 8:00 p.m., the limousines began to arrive. The elite of the werewolf world stepped out, alphas in tuxedos, loonies in designer gowns. They were there to gawk. They were there to see the Mad King and his new victim. Rumors were already circulating that the new girl was dead or in the hospital. Bets were being exchanged in the corners of the room. Benedict stood near the bar, nursing a scotch, smiling thinly at the guests. He checked his watch. He had spiked the alpha's private decanter an hour ago. By now, Garrick should be foaming at the mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer called out, though his voice wavered. Please welcome the Alpha King, Garrick Vilov. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The room went silent. Garrick appeared. He was magnificent. He wore a tuxedo that had been cut to accommodate his massive frame, accentuating the width of his shoulders. He didn't look sick. He didn't look mad. He looked like a god of war in formal wear, and on his arm was Talia. She wasn't wearing the drab waitress uniform anymore. She wore a gown of shimmering emerald silk that hugged her curves and pulled at her feet. Her auburn hair was pinned up, revealing her slender neck, but it was the mark on her neck that drew every eye. It wasn't a bite mark. They hadn't completed the mating bond yet, but she wore the Vilov family crest, a diamond necklace that had belonged to Garrick's mother. It was a declaration of protection. They descended the stairs together. Garrick moved with a predatory grace, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted Benedict. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. He looked stable. A southern alpha whispered to Benedict. Temporary. Benedict hissed, his glass cracking in his hand. Wait for the first dance. The orchestra began to play a waltz. Garrick led Talia to the center of the floor. I don't know how to waltz, Talia whispered, gripping his shoulder. Just follow me, Garrick murmured. I won't let you fall. They moved together. It was awkward at first, the size difference comical, but then they found a rhythm. Garrick was surprisingly light on his feet. For a moment, the world fell away. Talia looked up at him and he looked down at her, and the tension in the room shifted from fear to awe. Then the sabotage hit. As the music swelled, a waiter accidentally tripped near them. A tray of champagne flutes shattered on the floor. The sharp sound was like a gunshot. Simultaneously, a high-frequency emitter hidden in the flower arrangements, a device illegal in wolf territories, activated. It emitted a sonic pulse that only canines could hear. Every wolf in the room winced, covering their ears. But for an alpha of Garrick's size and sensitivity, it was torture. Garrick roared, dropping to one knee. He clutched his head. His eyes flashed amber. The beast, agitated by the noise, clawed at his mind. "He's turning," someone screamed. "He's going rogue." Benedict stepped forward, feigning concern. "Guards, restrain him. He's going to hurt the girl." 3 security guards loyal to Benedict rushed forward with stun batons. "No," Talia screamed. She didn't run away, she threw herself between Garrick and the guards. "Stay back," she yelled. She was 53, facing down 3 armed men. "Move, girl," one guard sneered. "He's dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Tia cried, turning to cup Garrick's face. He was growling, his teeth elongated, fighting the pain in his head. "Garrick, listen to me. Focus on my voice." "It's a noise, it's just a noise." Garrick's vision was red. The urge to kill everything in the room was overwhelming, but then he felt her hands. Small, warm anchor, Talia. The name cut through the red haze. He looked up. A guard was raising a stun baton to strike Talia, thinking she was in the way. The Mad King vanished. The protector emerged. Garrick moved faster than the eye could follow. He stood up, shielding Talia with his body, and caught the stun baton mid-swing. The electricity crackled against his palm, but he didn't even flinch. He crushed the baton in his hand, metal and plastic shattering. He grabbed the guard by the throat and lifted him 3 ft off the ground. "You dare," Garrick's voice was a low thunder. "Raise a weapon against my mate?" He threw the guard across the room. The man slid across the polished floor, crashing into the buffet table. The room was frozen. Garrick stood panting, his arm wrapped protectively around Talia. He wasn't mindless. He was fully in control. He turned his gaze to Benedict. "Find the source of that noise." Garrick commanded the room, "And bring me the man who planted it." Benedict turned to run, but the Southern Alpha, realizing he had been played, blocked his path. "I believe the king gave an order," the Southern Alpha said, crossing his arms. The shattered crystal of the champagne flutes on the floor was merely the prelude. The true symphony of destruction began with a whistle sharp, piercing, and terrifyingly human. Benedict stood by the heavy oak doors, his face twisting from the mask of a loyal advisor into the sneer of a usurper. He dropped his empty glass, the sound lost in the sudden, deafening crash that followed. The floor toe-sailing windows overlooking the storm-lashed cliffs exploded inward. A freezing wind carrying the scent of salt spray and wet fur shrieked into the ballroom, extinguishing the candles in the chandeliers. Then came the wolves. They were not the noble, groomed shifters of the highs. These were Farrell's exiles who had succumbed to the madness of the wolf, their minds eroded by bloodlust and isolation. Their fur was matted with mud and old gore, their ribs showing through patchy coats, their eyes rolling in a frenzy of hunger. There were a dozen of them, a tide of nightmares pouring over the velvet ropes. "Kill the king," Benedict screamed, retreating behind the wall of snarling beasts, pulling a serrated dagger from his jacket. The blade glistened with a dark viscous oil concentrated wolf's bane. "And kill the girl first. Break him?" The ballroom dissolved into bedlam. Screams tore through the air as the elite of the werewolf world scrambled for cover. Tables were overturned, expensive china shattering under the stampede of high heels and dress shoes. Alphas shoved their lunas behind pillars, baring their teeth, but the sheer ferocity of the feral intrusion caught them off guard. Garrick didn't flinch. He didn't run. He looked at the chaos, then down at Talia. His eyes were no longer the confused, pained amber of a man fighting a drugen-juiced fog. They had hardened into the cold, calculated green of a predator who had finally identified his prey. The sonic whine that had crippled him moments ago was still drilling into his skull. A white-hot spike of agony, but the threat to Talia overrode the pain. It relegated the torture to background noise. "Stay behind me," Garrick commanded. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, felt more than heard. "Do not move, Garrick, there are too many," Talia cried, her hands clutching the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, not in fear but in anticipation. "For a normal alpha, yes," Garrick said. He reached up and tore his silk bow tie loose, tossing it aside. He unbuttoned his collar, the fabric straining as the muscles in his neck corded, thick as steel cables. The transformation wasn't a shift into a wolf, but a shift into war. "But I am not normal." He turned to face the oncoming wave of teeth and claws. The first rogue leapt, a blur of gray fur aiming for Garrick's throat. The room held its breath. Garrick didn't even shift his stance. He caught the 300p beast in midair with one hand. The sound of the impact was sickening, a wet thud, as Garrick's fingers closed around the wolf's throat with a roar that shook the dust from the rafters. Garrick used the wolf as a bludgeon, swinging the body like a flail to knock back 2 other attackers. It was a massacre. The rumors of the Mega Alpha were not exaggerated. They were understatements. Garrick moved with a terrifying, impossible combination of speed and brute force. He was a tank with the agility of a viper. He threw an attacker across the room as if it were a ragged doll, the body crashing through the buffet table in a shower of silverware and ice. He snapped bones with casual swipes of his arms, his movements efficient, brutal, and devoid of mercy. But he was fighting a war on two fronts. Every movement sent a spike of agony through his brain as the hidden sonic emitter continued its relentless high-frequency assault. He was fighting blind, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to keep the monsters away from the small woman behind him. Benedict, watching from the safety of the perimeter, realized his mistake. The drugs hadn't weakened Garrick enough. The ferals were dying. The traitor's eyes shifted. He couldn't kill the king in combat, but he could break the king's spirit. While Garrick was occupied with 3 ferals near the orchestra pit, tearing through them with savage efficiency, Benedict circled the chaos. He moved like a snake, weaving through the panicked guests, his eyes locked on Talia. She was standing near an overturned table, her back to a stone pillar, watching Garrick with wide, terrified eyes. She was armed only with a heavy silver serving fork she had grabbed in desperation, holding it like a dagger. Benedict lunged. "No!" Garrick roared. He heard the shift in the air, the intent directed at his mate. He spun around, ignoring the feral that sank its teeth into his forearm. He backhanded the wolf away, shattering its jaw, and charged across the slick floor. He was too far away. The distance was impossible to close in time. Benedict raised the poisoned dagger, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Watch him break, little girl. Watch him weep over your corpse." Talia didn't scream. She didn't cower. In that split second, time seemed to slow. She saw the madness in Benedict's eyes, the sweat on his brow. But she also saw something else. She saw the small black box hidden in the flower arrangement near Benedict's feet, the device that was humming, vibrating, emitting the torture that was blinding her mate. "The noise is the weapon," she realized. "If I stop the noise, I free the king." She didn't retreat. She stepped forward. Benedict slashed. The jagged blade caught her shoulder, slicing through the emerald silk and biting into skin. The sting was sharp and hot, and blood blossomed instantly, staining the green fabric black. "Talia." Garrick's scream was a sound of pure devastation, but Talia ignored the pain. She ducked under Benedict's arm, scrambling toward the buffet table. She didn't go for a weapon. Clear's throat, she grabbed a heavy crystal pitcher filled with ice water. "Look at me," Benedict shouted, turning to finish her off. Talia spun around, heaving the pitcher with all her strength. She didn't aim at Benedict. She aimed at the floor, directly at the sparking, humming black box nestled in the roses. "Shut up," she yelled. Crash! The water and ice hit the exposed electronics of the emitter. Zizz pop-up. The device short-circuited with a violent flash of blue light and a puff of acrid smoke. The high-frequency whine died instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the world had suddenly snapped back into focus. Garrick, suddenly free of the background agony that had been plaguing his senses for hours, skidded to a halt. He blinked, the red haze lifting from his vision. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated power, crisp, clean, and limitless. His curse, the sensory overload, vanished. He looked at Talia, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Then slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his head to Benedict. Benedict froze. The dagger trembled in his hand. He looked at the king, and for the first time he understood the gravity of his error. He hadn't unleashed a beast. He had unshackled a god. "You," Benedict stammered, backing away. "We can negotiate the council." Garrick didn't negotiate. He moved faster than the eye could follow. He closed the distance in a single stride, grabbing Benedict by the lapels of his expensive suit. He lifted the man 3 ft into the air and slammed him into the stone pillar with enough force to crack the masonry behind him. Dust fell from the ceiling. "You poisoned my mind," Garrick growled, his face inches from the traitor's. The sound was low, intimate, and horrifying. "You tortured me for 3 years. You tried to turn me into a monster to suit your ambition." He tightened his grip, bunching the fabric until Benedict gasped for air, his feet kicking uselessly. "But you made a mistake," Garrick whispered, his eyes glowing with a lethal intensity. "You threatened her," Benedict wheezed, the dagger clattering uselessly to the floor. Garrick didn't kill him. Death was too easy. He tossed Benedict to the floor at the feet of the Southern Alpha, who had emerged from the crowd with his security detail. "Arrest him," Garrick commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "If he moves, tear his throat out." The fight was over. The surviving ferals, seeing their paymaster defeated and facing the enraged, unfettered king of the north, turned and fled into the night, followed closely by the estate security who had finally rallied. Garrick stood in the center of the ruined ballroom, his chest heaving, his tuxedo was shredded, bloodsome his, mostly not soaked, his white shirt. He looked terrifying, a figure carved from violence and marble. The guests held their breath. Was he still the Mad King? Was the danger over? Garrick turned slowly. He ignored the alphas. He ignored the whispers. He walked straight to Talia. She was leaning against the table, her hand pressed over her wound, her face pale, but she wasn't looking at him with fear. She was smiling. Garrick dropped to his knees before her. The entire room gasped. The Alpha King never knelt. It was against protocol. It was against nature. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice trembling, stripped of all its command. The hands that had just crushed a rebellion were now hovering gently over her injury, afraid to touch, afraid to taint her. "It's just a scratch," Talia whispered, though her voice wavered. She reached out with her good hand and touched his face, wiping away a streak of dark blood from his cheekbone. "You're okay. You're quiet because of you," Garrick said, the realization breaking his voice. He rested his forehead against her stomach, closing his eyes, surrendering to her touch. "You saved me, Talia. I broke the chains, but you broke the silence." A slow applause started from the back of the room. Then another. Then, like a dam breaking, the entire hall erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of approval, a thunderous acknowledgement of the new order. The Southern Alpha raised his glass high. "To the king," he shouted, "and to the queen who tamed him." 3 days after the incident in the ballroom, a heavy cleansing snow began to fall over the Pacific Northwest. It blanketed the jagged cliffs and the dark stone of the Villeneuve estate, burying the shattered glass and the blood stains under a pristine layer of white. For the first time in a decade, the silence inside the mansion didn't taste like fear. It felt like peace. Talia sat in the high-backed leather chair of the private library, a fire crackling in the hearth before her. The warmth seeped into her bones, soothing the ache in her bandaged shoulder. The pack physician, a capable woman named Dr. Sloan, who had replaced the treacherous staff, had assured her the wound would heal without a scar, thanks to the accelerated healing of the wolf blood now mingling with her own through the proximity to the Alpha. But Talia didn't mind the idea of a scar. It was proof that she had stood her ground. She stared into the flames, her mind replaying the chaos of the gala. It felt like a lifetime ago that she was wiping down tables in a diner in Idaho, worrying about her father's gambling debts. Now she was sitting in a castle, the savior of a king. The heavy oak door creaked open, breaking her reverie. Garrick entered. The change in him was nothing short of miraculous. The dark, bruised circles that had haunted his eyes for years had vanished, replaced by a clarity that was almost startling. He moved differently, too. The predatory, coiled tension, the look of a man constantly expecting an attack from within his own mind, was gone. He didn't loom. He simply occupied the space with a quiet, assured confidence. He wore a soft gray wool sweater and dark denim, looking less like a weapon of war and more like a man who had finally found his way home. "Dr. Aries was apprehended at the airstrip in Seattle," Garrick said quietly, closing the door behind him to shut out the draft. He moved to the ottoman opposite her chair, sitting so he was at eye level with her rather than towering over her. "Did he talk?" Talia asked, her voice soft. "He sang," Garrick replied, a dark edge to his voice. "He confessed everything. Since my father's death, Benedict had him administering a cocktail of synthetic stimulants and hallucinogens into my food. They called it treatment for my size, but it was designed to induce paranoia and aggression. They were manufacturing the madness." Garrick looked at his hands, the hands that had destroyed the chains in the basement. "They wanted a monster to scare the enemies, but they needed me unstable enough so the council would eventually remove me. Benedict wanted the regency. He wanted the power without the burden of the crown. He's gone now, Garrick," Talia said, reaching out to touch his knee. "He can't hurt you anymore." "Benedict has been formally exiled," Garrick confirmed, turning his hand to capture hers. His skin was warm, his grip firm, but incredibly gentle. "If he steps foot in North America again, the treaty ensures he will be hunted by every pack from Alaska to Mexico. He is a ghost." He looked at her then, his moss-green eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "But I didn't come here to talk about traitors. I came to talk about us." Talia's heart skipped a beat. She pulled her hand back slightly, tucking a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. "The staff, they're calling me Luna. They're asking me about menu changes and interior design. Garrick, I'm just a waitress from Idaho. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know pack law. I don't know how to play these political games. I don't need a politician," Garrick said firmly, cutting through her insecurity. "I have plenty of those. I have advisors, lawyers, and diplomats, and half of them tried to kill me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The fabric was worn with age. The black velvet faded to a deep charcoal. "I don't need someone who knows which fork to use at a state dinner," Garrick continued, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "I need a partner. I need the person who walked into a cage when everyone else ran away. I need the woman who looked a monster in the eye and saw a man worth saving." He opened the box. Talia gasped. Inside sat a ring that seemed to hold the very soul of the forest. It was a raw, uncut emerald, massive and glowing with an inner light set in a band of black titanium that had been forged to look like twisted roots. It was the ancestral ring of the Villeneuve matriarchs. A piece of jewelry that hadn't been worn since Garrick's mother passed away. The council called this morning. Garrick said, "They want to formalize the union. They want a coronation, but I don't care about their laws." He took the ring from the box and held it between his thumb and forefinger. "The maiden bond," he murmured. I felt it the moment you touched me in the basement. My wolf recognized you before my mind even understood what was happening. That's why the pain stopped. Talia, you are my mate. Not because of a lottery, not because of a debt, but because you are the only one strong enough to hold me. Talia looked from the ring to his eyes. She saw the vulnerability there, the terrifying openness of a man who had spent his life building walls. She realized then that her strength wasn't in physical power or political savvy. Her strength was her heart. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. Garrick slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been resizing itself for centuries, waiting for her. Then rule with me, he said. He leaned in and for the first time he kissed her. It wasn't the tentative, fearful touch of a stranger. It was acclaiming as their lips met, a jolt of electricity. The true alpha spark arced between them. It wasn't painful. It was like coming up for air after being underwater for years. It was slow, tender, and filled with a desperate, overwhelming gratitude. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning and had finally found the shore. 5 years later, the Vilov estate was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was the heart of the Northern Alliance. The grand ballroom, once the site of a massacre, was now filled with the sound of a string quartet and the laughter of dignitaries from across the continent. The Vilov curse was a distant memory, a dark chapter in a history book that had been rewritten. King Garrick stood on the balcony, watching the snowfall. He was still a giant of a man, his presence commanding respect from every alpha in the territory. But the rage was gone. He was the architect of the Great Peace, the leader who had united the warring factions. But he wasn't watching the guests. He was watching the garden below. There, bundled in winter coats, 3 rambunctious, oversized pups, 2 boys, and a girl were wrestling in the snow. They were strong, displaying the megagenetics of their father, but they were laughing. Talia stepped out onto the balcony beside him. She wrapped her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his arm. She radiated the calm, assured power of a true Luna. They're going to destroy the rose bushes again, she noted with a smile. Let them, Garrick rumbled, pulling her closer into his warmth. Roses grow back. Childhoods don't. He looked down at his wife, the waitress who had walked into the rain, the girl who had saved him. In the nursery later that night, after the dignitaries had gone and the pups were tucked into their oversized beds, the children begged for a story. They didn't want to hear about wars or treaties. Tell us about the monster in the basement. The youngest boy chirped. It wasn't a monster, the girl corrected him sleepily. It was Daddy. Garrick sat on the edge of the bed, his massive hand resting gently on the quilt. He looked at Talia, who was leaning against the doorframe, the emerald ring glinting in the soft light. That's right, Garrick said softly, but the story isn't about the monster. It's about the brave girl in the raincoat who walked into the dark. And what did she do? The boy asked, his eyes heavy. Garrick smiled, an expression of pure, unburdened love. She turned on the light, and that is the incredible true story of Garrick and Talia. It wasn't magic that broke the curse, and it wasn't brute strength. It was the courage of one person willing to see the truth when everyone else only saw fear. Talia Ali didn't just save a king, she saved a soul. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many monsters in our own lives are just people in pain waiting for someone brave enough to reach out a hand? If this story gave you chills, or if you're rooting for the underdogs like Talia, hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Talia's shoes? Would you have walked into that cage? Let me know in the comments below with number Team Omega or number Team Alpha. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a saga. We drop new romance dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next chapter.